We are pleased to be here. And Roberta and I just had I wanted to share some photographs of things that the Junaluska Heritage Association has been up to since the publication of the book. And so I will share my screen here. So the book was published in 2020. And since then, one of the things that we've been working on is better signage at the Clarissa Hill Cemetery. So the historic Black cemetery in Boone, right next to the university, is the one that's pictured in the book. And we dedicated that monument, that marker there in 2017, I believe. And then in last year, we started working on the Clarissa Hill Cemetery, which is the cemetery that African Americans started to be buried in the mid-1950s, because the historic Black cemetery had filled up. So many of the graves at Clarissa Hill Cemetery, which is on the outskirts of Boone, near Hilltop, many of the graves are unmarked. And so the North Carolina Department of Archaeology came out a couple months ago to do some GPR at that cemetery, just like was done at the historic Black cemetery in Boone. So GPR is ground penetrating radar. And that contraption there you see in the picture is the ground penetrating radar. And so that has to be run over the entire area. And so far, this time they just did the upper part of the cemetery. So I guess the lower part of the cemetery is yet to be done. And this was set in motion by Dr. Alice Wright, who is an archaeologist in the Department of Anthropology at ASU. And her team now also has its own GPR equipment. So in the future, they will be able to do this kind of thing on their own. But this was done by the state of North Carolina archaeologists. We also have commissioned a sign to be made, and it's going to look like this. Right now, it's sitting in the basement of the church because it has to be installed yet. The posts weren't correct. And but this is what it's going to look like. So that will be dedicated whenever it is installed. And then another thing we did was to get the county to install directional signs to the cemetery. So we got them to put this sign here at this intersection, and then also a sign at the driveway into the cemetery. Now, Dr. Alice Wright and her husband, Dr. Cameron Goki, also supervised an archaeology field school this late spring, testing for sites in the Junaluska neighborhood. And so these are a few of their students sifting. And the sites were selected because in and around the core area of the community, on land that was thought possibly to have some of the slave dwellings, and in particular Troy Council's home, which is off Junaluska Road, right, Roberta?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that where this picture is? Because I wasn't here when this was done.
Yes.
Okay.
It was.
Yeah. And here they are digging some test pits. They did this in various spots in the community. And so the hope is that, and we haven't seen the final report yet from that research and survey work, but the hope is that they might identify places where more extensive archaeology could be done in the future, so that we might learn more about the early history of the community. Another thing that the Junaluska Heritage Association did this spring was to set up a free food pantry in the neighborhood. This is right down from the Mennonite Brethren Church. And so it's for people to leave what they can and take what they need. And it's getting some use.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then thirdly, the Junaluska Heritage Association worked with the Historic Preservation Commission of the town of Boone to get a marker indicating the Junaluska community's historical significance. This is placed at the corner of North Depot Street and Queen Street, right near the public library. So this was dedicated this last Saturday on Juneteenth in 2021. And it's kind of hard to read all that, but if you're interested, you can go look at the marker in the town of Boone. This was the dedication ceremony. Excuse me. And here's Roberta speaking. The bouquet was given by the Chancellor of Appalachian State University for the occasion. And these are the members of our little sort of executive committee of the Junaluska Heritage Association. On the left is Dr. Kristen Baldwin Dethridge. She's in the public history program at ASU. And then Lynn Patterson and her mother, Roberta Jackson. And then Diane Blanks, a community member, and then me.
That's great.
So that, I'll stop sharing now. Is that? Anyway,
wonderful.
And I think, you know, I'll open it up for, I think, unless Roberta, do you have something to say that you wanted to say?
No, not really. I thought I would answer questions if I could.
Good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's great. Those are wonderful updates. And I just think it's incredible that all that's been done in the past year. You know, it's kind of like momentum being built with the publishing of the book, and then that street marker is really nice, and the work that you're doing on the cemetery is great. That's wonderful to hear that that's been done. Now, one thing that was on that street marker that I thought was interesting was how the early settlement of the Junaluska community kind of started with some like people that were half Native American, seemed like they were half white, half Native American, and then some enslaved people that were up there as well. So that was very interesting to me, just these, how this community was kind of integrated in its own way in the early days, and those relationships that were built up there. And then I think there was a guy, was he called Chief Ross, that lived on top of Howard's Knob.
Yeah, Peggy Grimes, Polly Grimes' grandfather, Samuel, what was his name, Roberta? It's in the book. Yeah, he was called Chief Junaluska.
Yeah, Chief Junaluska, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Just, imagining just settling up on the mountain
Underwood.
so long ago, you know.
Samuel Underwood.
And those early stories of the people that were there, some of them were sharecroppers over on the mountain and everything, and just building up. Now, one thing I was interested in was the role that music played in the community? I know that the gospel choir is really a big part of the church, and kind of like that's how I heard about Junaluska first, was the choir being renowned for being so good. So can you talk a little bit about the role of music in the community?
Roberta was a member of the choir in the church for a long time.
For years. And then I thought, sit down, you're too old. Let some of the younger people sing. So my daughter's in the choir now. And we've had the choir for years. I think at least 50 or 60 years. We've had this choir. And members change. Some die, some leave, some join. So there's all, and even the musicians that play for the choir change, but we just adapt to it because music is a big part of our community.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And the choir actually performed at the
Oh yeah.
marker dedication on Saturday, on Juneteenth.
Without music, I was a little
I know.
surprised.
Ella.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's great. And just how the church, I mean, is so tied to the founding of the community. And just I thought the origin story with the Mennonite Brethren coming to the area was very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and Roberta grew up with Reverend Rhonda Horton in the church. Did he baptize you?
I think so. I'll have to check. I'll have to put that in my memory bank. But he was a great man and a great influence in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, yes, the Reverend Rhonda Horton, he had such a long life too, 1895 to 1986, to see so much change during his life, and the growth of the community, and the just, I mean, living in the mountains during all that. But I thought it was very interesting, since you all organized the book with chronologically by birthday for the oral histories, just to see kind of how people's lives changed with each generation. And I mean, the Reverend Rhonda Horton, he talks about when he was a boy working with his father, and just how little they were paid.
Yeah.
And the types of work that he could actually get.
Yeah.
And those opportunities that were available to them at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the strengths of the book is that you see the sweep of the 20th century in this little community, and the oral histories of the individuals who've lived there. And it is kind of amazing and awe-inspiring, the changes that the community and the town of Boone went through, as well as the individuals, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things that a friend of mine read the book, and one of her takeaways was that despite all the trials and tribulations that the community suffered during the 20th century with segregation and Jim Crow and so on, and the prejudice and discrimination, that there was little bitterness among the members of the community, at least expressed in the book. And I find that to be the case really in my interactions with people in the community today.
Yeah.
You know, I think their Mennonite faith is a big foundation of that, you know, to love others.
Mm-hmm.
That's Jesus' commandment. And not to dwell on negative things.
Yes.
And conflict.
Yeah. I agree with you, Sue. I hadn't thought about it before, but the Mennonite church, Reverend Horton and Reverend Hatton in the Mennonite church preached love, you know, and that was, I think we just grew up knowing, and as far as being upset with anybody else, I am who I am and I grew up to be what I am. So nobody can take that away if you don't let them. And I think that's the way, and then on a lot of it, I think was because we were kind of isolated, that we depended on each other. We loved each other. There was no locked doors in our communities, and kids went from house to house to house to be together. I told my daughter, Lynn, the other day, I could remember us sleigh riding outside until it was so cold and so dark that my mom would have to call us in. And we didn't want to separate from our friends, but we did. And everybody seemed to have one good friend that stuck with them through the years. So I think it was because we were small and isolated, and we were almost self-sufficient.
Yeah. And another thing I'd have to say, in as long as many years that I have known Roberta, which goes back before the founding of the Junaluska Heritage Association, I have never heard you say anything in anger, anything mean about anybody. I mean, and I think that is also something that comes from the faith and that what is taught in the Mennonite Brethren Church.
Yeah, I think so too, because I can't be responsible for, I told a neighbor of mine, I can't be responsible for how people treat me. I have to be responsible for how I treat them. And that's the most important thing. And maybe that is spiritual. Maybe that is from the church.
Yeah, I would say.
Well, I think that's very interesting to hear you say that, and then how that love is such a big part of the Mennonite faith, because I was just struck by with the founding of the church, where it came down and then built the integrated church in Elk Park. And then the locals said that they didn't want an integrated church. And so he said, fine, it'll just be an all black church.
It was, and the Shedders really were the Mennonites from Kansas.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That was just such an interesting part for me, was how the Mennonite missionaries that came in, from the beginning, that they met that kind of racism with, well, fine, I'm just going to side with the people that are oppressed, right? I'm going to side with the people that are getting the short end of the stick, and instead of reinforcing that negativity. I just thought that was a beautiful story. And then there was the story about one of the, there was someone in the community that threatened one of the missionaries, and then he was kind to the guy, and then it ended up writing him Christmas cards every year until he died, and that like really turned the other cheek, and actually like putting forth that faith and practice what they're preaching. I thought that was really cool.
Love your enemy.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to me that there was a Methodist church at one point too, but then it seemed like from when that church ended up dissolving, that a lot of those members were fine with joining the Mennonite church. That was kind of the impression I got from the story.
Yep.
I think so. Sue had a lot of interaction with the Methodist church and trying to save that church. And because usually in the neighborhood, you're related to somebody. I don't care where you went to church or where you lived, we were all just one community. We didn't get that church saved though, did we?
No, didn't get the church saved, unfortunately. If it had survived until today, I think it could have been saved.
Yes,
But this is
I
a
agree.
different era. Yeah.
and so about the church, the Methodist church being torn down, I think that's interesting. Like one thing that came to mind with talking about trying to save and preserve some of these structures that have significance to the community, but they don't meet like the standards of what a historic building might be for this area, right? They're not stone built, even though they're built around the same time. They'll save a WPA era building and make that a historic site, but then a house or a church is built in the same period because it wasn't with similar materials, right? Then they don't deem that necessary. But on my impression of reading that was that the materials that the people in the community had to build, you know, and a lot of times they were given inferior products, or it's like it's cheaper to build with lumber than it is to build with stone. And then if they're not, if they're only saying stone buildings are historically significant, you know, there seems to be like that is privileging a certain type of access.
Actually, so the Methodist Church was just built of wood, I think, you know, chestnut and other woods from the immediate area. The problem wasn't the materials it was built with saving it. The problem was ownership of the land. That was in question, and it was not clear to us, at least, as at the time when we were looking at the deeds. It was not clear that the land had been turned over to the Black community. It was made available to them to build a church on, but there was no clear evidence that the title to the land had been turned over to the community, and so it was not eligible for any kind of historic preservation monies as a result. Now, the Mennonite Brethren Church has vinyl siding on it, which I think was added in the 1980s. And unfortunately, that means it doesn't qualify for historic preservation because it's not the original materials. Now, one of the things that's been suggested recently is that if we wanted to try to get historic designation for the church, the Mennonite Brethren Church, we could try to raise money to replace the vinyl siding and put it back to the original wood siding, in which case it could probably qualify for historic preservation by the state.
Yes.
I don't know how much money it would take to replace the vinyl siding, or if the church wants to do that. But there are all these complications to getting historic preservation status and monies. Yeah.
Well, the church is over 100 years old now. And I think I can remember the church before the siding was put on. And it looked fine to me. I don't know who, well, I was a kid, so I didn't really, I didn't pay much attention to whose decision it was to put the siding on. And I actually think that if it's pulled off, I don't know what siding does to brick or block, that it may be okay, but I don't know.
It would be more maintenance.
Yeah.
If vinyl siding were removed.
Yeah.
So it would be an expense not only to remove the siding, but also to maintain the wood structure. But it's something worth considering. And we've talked about it, and, you know.
Well, it's that the importance of saving an icon and like a landmark because those type of places have so much significance in the memory of the people and like in the fabric of your community. And so I think that it like just having those physical markers on the landscape are so important. And it seems like a lot of the places that are mentioned in the book is like gathering places and community spaces aren't there anymore, right? I mean, places like the chocolate bar aren't there anymore. And it's kind of like a compounding loss when you already have people moving away too, and then these landscape places are being removed as well. But it's so fortunate to see that things like the historic marker going up, and then the work being done on the cemetery, because having those markers on the landscape are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mean, if you look at the town of Boone in general, there isn't much left of the old town of Boone. You know, I mean, the downtown King Street, maybe 2 or 3 blocks, is about all that's left.
Yeah.
And so, but I think the town of Boone has become more interested in saving its historic structures. I'm glad to see that.
Yes.
I mean, the town of Blowing Rock, you look at the town of Blowing Rock, and there's so much that's changed in the last 10 years, 15 years. You know, it's important for us to preserve our history and to preserve some of those structures from earlier times. It reminds people of the history of the area, you know, what life was like.
That's important. Well, actually, the chocolate bar, the main portion of that structure is still standing.
Yeah.
Right across from the public library, next to Austin and Barnes Funeral Home. That block building there was part of the chocolate bar.
And it's kind of used by the funeral home, I think, for storage or something.
Storage.
Yeah, just to have it as part, like a building that's actually being used. That was one thing that struck me too. Reverend RD Horton's story. He mentioned that there are a lot of other churches, like there are other Mennonite Brethren churches in the area. And I was just wondering how many of those might still be operating, because he talks about one in Cranberry or the ones in Lenore. One of the friends of the museum, Theresa Gloucester, she's from Lenore, and I met her, and she's Mennonite as well. So how prevalent are the other Mennonite churches in the area?
Well, when I was growing up, they always said 6 churches, but one of the churches in Lenore has kind of built a larger building, so there's 2 or 3 different congregations that can come together. But there's a church in West End, North Carolina, one in Darby, North Carolina, the one here at Boone. Am I forgetting one?
Beach Bottom.
Beach Bottom, yes. So we still
Avery County.
Yeah. But as far as Cranberry, and no, not anymore. But we have about 4 or 5 of those churches left.
Laytown. I think Laytown is.
Oh, yeah, Laytown.
Yeah.
I haven't been down there in a year and a half. So.
Now, one thing I thought was interesting too is talking about the schools before integration, and just how, so Roberta, you live in the old school now, right, on Wynn Way. So that
I live above it.
Above it, okay, sorry. Yeah. But yeah, so there was a school there, but then I was struck when it said that the only high school in the area was in Asheville.
Yes, but I'm not quite sure when that was, because
it said that. Sorry, I was just reading. What is
Gertrude Folk?
Nell Ray's story, and she said that she had to go to high school in Stevens Lee High School.
Yeah,
and it was open from 1923 to 1965. But I just wonder what that was like for people to have to leave home as a young teen and then move 2 hours away, to go to high school. Like, how many people would actually go through with that?
Well, Nell Ray went to that high school in Asheville when she lived there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then they moved to Boone later on once she was married to my uncle. She's my aunt Nell. And but she never really talked about the school very much. I guess because I didn't ask her.
Well, now, James McQueen had to leave the county to go to high school, and I think he went down to Kings Mountain. So until the school was built on Wynn Way
Mhm.
in, when was that, Roberta? In
60, 59, 60.
1965, maybe 1965. Until then, there was, or maybe 1960.
Yeah, 60. Because I
1960.
went to.
Until then, there was no high school in Watauga County for Black students. So they had to go somewhere else if they were going to go on to school. And so most of them didn't, you know, because it would cost quite a bit of money to go out of the county and pay for your room and board.
Yeah, I agree.
But Roberta, because the high school opened
Yes.
in time for you to go
Yes.
to school in Watauga County in
Yes.
Junaluska with the new school that was built. And you were in the first graduating class, was that correct?
Yes.
From that
Because I graduated in 1964. We went in 1960. And I graduated in 64. Well, by then, integration was coming along, and some of the kids who were just below me didn't graduate from Watauga up here. They graduated, they were integrated into Appalachian school.
Yeah, teaching. No, it was Watauga. They would have gone to Watauga.
Yeah, some of them went to Watauga, but now some of the younger ones went to Appalachian
Elementary.
Yes, Appalachian Elementary. See, I'm older than they were. I don't remember. Yeah, because I remember some of them who went there before they went to the high school.
Right, right.
So that's interesting. Just how the school building on Wynn Way was built, and then a few years later, integration happened. So then that school ended up being closed.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The
county wasted its money.
Yes.
And so were there other impacts on like any Black-owned businesses or anything, or the Junaluska community? Like when integration happened, did any other things have to close? Or I was struck by the older folks talking about integration, just saying how people in the town were fine. You just have to worry about some of those folks out far in the hills.
Who said that? But that's true. Because they weren't used to Black people, and the Black people weren't used to white people. So yeah, it was a little harder for people who didn't live in town to accept the Black students.
Yeah, the only Black settlements in Watauga County, aside from Junaluska, were in Cove Creek, a small little settlement, and in Beaver Dam, out near Bethel.
Yeah.
So those, little isolated, small little Black settlements. Other than that, county residents didn't really have much contact with Black people.
No. And because they came to our school.
Right, those students from those little communities came to the Black school.
They were bused into our school. The Black students were from Cove Creek and out in the country, as we called it. And they went to school with us. So I just think people weren't used to something different. And some didn't want things to be different, but then people got better. You can't make people want you or to be your friend, but things got better for the Black students, I think, because they were kind of accepted.
Mhm.
See, I graduated in 64, so I never went to an integrated school, or at least not until I went to college. So I never had that experience that my sisters and my brother had because they were younger. And one of my sisters even quit high school. But by the time she retired, she had a RN degree and some degree past that. But she had to fight for it herself because she just didn't like the interaction with the students at Watauga High School. But you know, there's always a way.
So before Watauga High School, there were how many high schools in the county? I don't know, Blowing Rock, Boone's, Cove Creek, out near Mabel, wasn't that what, or
I don't know.
there were, and then Bethel. Well, there were at least 4 high schools. So what happened when they built Watauga High School is they consolidated all the high schools in the county, and they integrated the high school by consolidating the Black students in with the high school. So
Yeah.
Watauga, you know, that is an interesting history of the county and the county leaders' decisions,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to build that single high school. But as I recall in conversations I've had with people, is that a single high school was deemed better because it would be able to provide more resources to the students.
Oh.
Yeah, they could have better science labs and so on.
Which was
at a single
true.
high school.
Yeah. Because when I went to the school at Winway, we had hand-me-down books. You know, people would write their names in them, and some of them were a little older than I am, but I remember some of them because of, so we never got new things. We never had a science lab or that. So, and what our teachers had to do was to work it so that we would get experiences that we would normally not have gotten if they had. And our teachers usually were from out of town. They were from Winston-Salem State. They would come here and board with a family until the weekends, and then they would go back home. But I appreciate my teachers. They were great teachers.
And didn't you attend Winston-Salem State?
Yes, I went to Winston-Salem State, and the only thing that I noticed where I was not up with the other students is new math. I'd never heard of new math. So and I guess now it's old math. And I went to school, and they knew. I didn't know anything about it, so it got me behind, and it was harder for me to catch up with that. But other than that, I basically went in like the other students at Winston-Salem State.
But of course, that was a segregated college.
Yes.
At the time.
Yes.
And so the first integrated school you went to was Appalachian State.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was after I was married and had kids. I didn't get to finish my degree, and I decided I wanted my degree. So I enrolled at Appalachian while I worked at the university in the physical plant and got my degree. In fact, it took me so long, they called me in the office and said, "Are you going to be a professional student?" And I realized I need to get going. So then I took a semester off to finish my degree.
Didn't you graduate the same time Lynn graduated?
Almost.
Almost.
I said,
Okay, your
she
daughter.
graduated the year before I did.
Uh-huh.
And then my son was coming up, who was 2 years behind her. And I said, if I don't finish, everybody in the family is going to be a graduate before I am. So that's one of the reasons I went back and finished it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, that's wonderful that you went back, and that would have been something if you and Lynn walked across the stage on the same day.
And Lynn was my student
Yeah, she loved you.
back when I started working with the community in 1989. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's wonderful. So then, did you, Sue, when you started in '89, how did that come about? How did you begin working there? And then was it, and then and Lynn just said, "Oh, I'm from there," when you announced what the project was going to be?
Yeah. Well, I wanted, I was, teaching in the anthropology department, and we had an undergraduate program only. And I wanted to give my students an opportunity to do research. And I had come to Boone from Southern California, where I did work with Mexican Americans, did my dissertation, and then worked on a 4-year research project there. So I was interested in ethnic communities.
Yeah.
And I knew about the Junaluska community. I didn't know much about it, but I had heard about it. And so I decided that I would try to get some money to hire some students during the summer to do some research. And so the two undergraduate students that I had working with me, Maria Braswell and Krimmer Mackey, were great students and very resourceful. And they interviewed, many of the interviews in the book are from their original interviews in that summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then I forgot now exactly how Lynn and her friend Tony
Yes.
Ball was her name at the time, came to me, but I think maybe because of the interviews in the community, they knew that research was being done there. And so they came to me because they were students at the university. And so I got them to do, some interviewing as well.
Yeah.
And then Lynn worked on the Whittington family history, right?
Yes. Yeah.
When she was.
She did a fantastic job because she showed it to me. I said, "Where did you get this information?"
Yeah.
And she said, "I researched it."
Yeah.
She hasn't forgotten you either. She's not here right now, or I would have her to comment. But
yeah. Well, I think that might have been the initial spark to her interest in family history, which has continued, and she's continues to do that kind of family research. So
yeah,
that's nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really participatory research right there. That is wonderful. And I am so appreciative of the work that y'all have done in documenting and carrying these stories on and forward. And there's just so much value and importance in reading stories like this and honoring and lifting up those who have come before, and by looking at their experiences and learning for ourselves. So I really appreciate y'all putting together the book and the work that you've done and the work that you're continuing to do at the Junaluska Heritage Association. And so now that we know how it's all started, it really kind of adds another layer to the book that we've got here. And just knowing that these 200 something pages are really like 40 years of work and love and effort put into it and come together.